Thank you. So I'll first of all like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference and for organizing this conference in these difficult times. So my talk today will be on D-instanton perturbation theory. And I'll try to divide my talk into two parts. In the first part, I'll try to give a long introduction to the problem that we'll try to address. And in the second part, I'll try to describe the solution and with some results. This is based on some work in progress and also some earlier papers which are listed here. And more details can be found at some lectures at the Sao Paulo school that I gave a few weeks ago, which is here. So let me then begin by describing the problem that we want to address in this talk. So as we know, string theory began with Venezian amplitude. So this describes tree-level scattering amplitude of 4 tachyons in open string theory. And the worldsheet expression for this amplitude is given here. Okay. Here P1, P2, P3 and P4 are the external momenta which are entering, which are counted as positive if they are ingoing, negative if they are outgoing. This amplitude of course diverges in certain region in the kinematic space. So if 2 P1 dot P2 is less than or equal to -1, you see that there is a divergence from y equal to 0 end. And if 2 P2 dot P3 is less than or equal to -1, there is a divergence from the y equal to 1 end. And the conventional viewpoint that one takes is to define the amplitude for in the region where it's well defined, where the integral is well defined, and then analytically continue to the other kinematic regions. And that gives the nice gamma function form of the amplitude that you are familiar with. However, analytic continuation does not always work because it may not be possible to move away from the singularity by changing the external momentum. Some examples of these has already been discussed earlier, that involves mass normalization or the shift of the vacuum. So what we'll do today is to discuss another situation where analytic continuation fails, and that's in computing D-instanton contribution to string amplitudes. So I'll try to explain what the issues are in computing D-instanton contribution. So let me first describe in a few words what we mean by D-instanton. So for us, D-instanton will be a D-brane which has Dirichlet boundary condition on all non-compact directions, including Euclidean time. The reason that they are important is because they give non-perturbative contribution to string amplitudes, which may be important in many situations. In fact, the KKLT modular stabilization that you are all familiar with makes use of Euclidean D3 branes, which you can regard as a D-instanton in this language. The problem, however, is that the open strings that live on the D-instanton do not carry any continuous momentum. And as a result, we cannot move away from the singularities by simply varying the external momentum. Okay? There are genuine singularities that we encountered in carrying out the worldsheet analysis of amplitudes. And sometimes you can argue that the divergent parts cancel after suitable choice of regulators, but this still leaves the finite parts after the cancellation ambiguous. Okay? So it doesn't really help that we can make the divergent parts cancel because the finite parts are still ambiguous. So we'll study this in the context of a particular example, and this involves bosonic string theory in 2 dimensions. The worldsheet theory in this case is just a free scalar x that describes the time coordinate, and a Liouville field theory which has central charge 25. The total central charge adds up to 26, which cancels anomalies on the worldsheet. So it's really like a regular critical string, but a somewhat strange one. And in this case, the familiar tachyon is actually a massless state because we have a linear dilaton background in the Liouville sector. And we can calculate S matrix or scattering amplitudes involving these massless tachyons. So in this paper, Balthazar, Rodriguez and Yin, which will be referred to as BRY from now on, they computed the single D-instanton contribution to the 2-point amplitude of closed string tachyons. And I'll describe the result in some detail in the next few slides. But let me just mention that this model is interesting because there is a dual matrix model description, and this dual matrix model description actually gives the exact results. Okay? So you can compare what we compute from the string theory side with what we get from the dual matrix model. So this is where I am describing the BRY result. So the leading contribution, by leading I mean the leading contribution to the d-instant and induced amplitude. Leading contribution comes from the product of two d square point functions, which is shown here. And so let me describe the counting of the powers of G string. Besides this e to the minus 1 over G string, which accompanies all d-instant and amplitudes, we'll count 1 over G string for every disk and a factor of G string for every closed string vortex operators. So these are the closed string tachyon vortex operators. So this is a ordered G string to the 0. So they computed this amplitude and they found a result which is given here. So n is an overall normalization constant, about which I'll have more to say later. Gs is the string coupling constant, and minus omega and omega 2 are the energies of the incoming and outgoing tachyons. Now notice that we have energy conserving delta function here, but if we just naively look at diagrams like this, you might expect that you will have a separate energy conservation because you have to, this is a disconnected diagram. The reason that that's not the case is because d-instantons break time transition invariance. So on individual d-instanton amplitudes, there is no energy conserving delta function. This delta function that you see here comes at the end after integration over collective modes, and that I'll again describe in some detail later. So unlike in the usual string diagrams where we ignore disconnected contributions because they span only a higher codimension subspace of the kinematic space, here it's as important as connected diagrams. And this is the result. This in fact is the leading contribution. So at the next order, we find three different contributions. First of all, we have 2-point function on the disk. The G string counting you can again do 1 over G string from the disk and a factor of G string from each of these vortex operators. So this is a forward G string, and you see this G string over here. And this is the full result that BRY found. You will probably hear more about it in later in CINS talk today, okay, but I'm just summarizing. So this is the form of the result that they found. So this is the leading contribution, and it's multiplied by some complicated function of f, which has this structure. The important point for us will be this piece, which you see is an integral over this variable y, which is divergent from y equal to 0. Furthermore, the exponent here is insensitive to the external energies. So these divergences from the y goes to 0 limit cannot be tamed by simply deforming the omega i's. So this is very different from the kind of divergences that you see in the Venezian amplitude, where the exponent depends on the energy and you can change the exponent by changing the energies. That's why the analytic continuation works. I should also say that these finite terms actually also contain divergences. They come from the closed string poles, but those are of the type which can be tackled using analytic continuation. Okay, so I'll regard them as finite terms. So by looking at this, okay, we cannot make sense of this as yet. Okay, but let's try to do the best we can. We'll parameterize this as a sum of a constant f that comes from the first term and another constant df times omega 1 omega 2, okay, that comes from the second term, and then there are these finite terms which you can evaluate in principle. Okay, these involve some integrals, but in principle you can evaluate them. The second contribution comes from the product of a disk 1-point function and annulus 1-point function. So this is the diagram, okay, and there is another diagram where the two punctures are exchanged. So this is 1 and 2, and then there is also 2 and 1. You can do the G string counting. Okay, this gives 1 over G string, annulus gives you G string to the 0, and then 2 closed string punctures gives G string each. So this is again of order G string. And here is the BRY result for this. Again, I have captured the BRY result in two functions, in a function G. Okay, so it's G of omega 1 and G of omega 2. So G basically is a ratio of the disk 1-point function to the ratio of the annulus 1-point function to a disk 1-point function. So this has the structure of the leading term multiplied by these two functions. But again, the important point for us is that this G of omega is divergent. It's expressed as a double integral. One is the modulus of the annulus, that's log p, and the other one is the position of the vortex operator, okay, that's captured in x. So this has divergence both from the x goes to 0 limit and the v goes to 0 limit. And these again cannot be tamed by adjusting the omegas. So again, we do the best we can. We write this as a constant plus another constant times omega square plus finite terms which you can evaluate and proceed. The third contribution, which actually was not evaluated by BRY, but you can easily write down the structure of this term. So this comes from the product of two d square point functions and the 0 point function on the surface of Euler number -1, which includes actually two surfaces, these with two holes, which I have shown here, and you also have a torus with one hole that I have not displayed. By looking at this diagram, you can write down the expression for this amplitude, okay, which is here. The C will have a complicated expression which has not been written down, but this is just a constant. It's a real constant which also has divergences of the kind that I mentioned. So now we set omega equal to omega minus omega 2 because after all we are considering this one point function and there will be a overall delta function. So after setting omega 1 equal to minus omega 2, the total unknown factor in the 2-point function in 1-to-1 amplitude is this. And here these are unknown constants as yet. So what BRY did is to numerically compare this result with the matrix model results as a function of omega. The matrix model result of course is known. So they compared this with the matrix model results. So the leading order result, the comparison of the leading order result gave you determine the normalization factor. This can be done analytically. And then they found that the subleading order, the order G string contribution, gives an excellent fit provided we choose these constants appropriately. So they found that this combination, which appears here, if you choose this to be minus 0.496 and this combination to be minus 1.399, then you get excellent fit between the numerical results that you get from the string theory side and the matrix model results that you can get analytically. So the question that you would want to ask is it possible to get these results from string theory without invoking the matrix model? Because after all, if the string theory is a complete theory, at least perturbatively, you should be able to get these results from string theory itself. So before we go into that question, let me just say that actually the same functions f, g and c can be used to compute not just 1-to-1 scattering amplitude, but 1-to-n tachyon scattering. And again, the matrix model answer for this is known. And the reason that this can be done is because even if you have many external tachyons, there are many external closed string states, tachyon again is a massless state here. So even if you have many external closed string states, the leading contribution always comes from just the product of these quantum functions. And at the subleading order, most of them will have just one point function on the disk. And then you can either have a pair connecting to a disk, or one of them connecting to an annulus, or all of them connecting to disks, and then there is a separate contribution from a surface of Euler character -1, the 0-point function. So because of this, the same function f and g can be used to compute the 1-to-n amplitude, which I have written down here. And now if you look at the divergent part of this amplitude, after imposing this energy conservation, which comes at the end, we find that the divergent part of this amplitude is given by this combination for n 1-to-n tachyon scattering. And then there is of course finite part. So because the matrix model result for 1-to-n tachyon scattering is known, we can compare this with the matrix model result for different n, and we can in fact fix all these 4 constants separately. Notice that bg and bf always comes in this combination, and that's because the bf comes in the combination omega I omega j, sum over all ij, and bf comes in sum over omega I squared. And when we impose this momentum conserving delta function, the sum over omega I omega j product becomes related to the sum over omega I squared. Okay. So only this combination appears in the S matrix. So independent of the matrix model, what we see is that if we just look at the 2-dimensional string theory, then there are apparently some divergent constants which are listed here, and these constants appear in the S matrix. And string theory, if anything, is designed to calculate S matrix. So if these appear in the S matrix, then string theory should be able to determine these constants unambiguously without invoking duality with the matrix model. And the question that you want to ask is how. So this is more or less the end of the first part of the talk. Okay, this is the problem we want to address. And I should say that even though I'll focus on two-dimensional string theory, the problem is more general because D instanton of course appear in also many kinds of string theories. So now let me focus on the solution to this problem. So what we will do is to use the general framework of open closed string field theory to fix these constants. But before I describe the details, or at least some of the details of how you go about doing this, let me just state the results that we have obtained so far. So the analysis based on open closed string field theory fixes, in principle, it fixes all the 4 constants that I listed. So far, 2 of the constants have been fixed. So AF turns out to be -12 in this analysis. This combination turns out to be -log4. AG is in progress. Okay, this is a little harder, but it's certainly possible to do this computation. C is also computable in principle, but certainly it's more difficult than the others. Okay, and so far no progress has been made towards computing C. But there is something we can do to fix C, and that requires an additional assumption. Namely, if we assume the equality of the quantum corrected actions for the D instanton and the matrix model instanton, then one can argue that C in fact is 0. Okay, because this captures the correction to the D instanton action. And by assuming equality of these two, okay, we can fix this to 0. Now I should say that this is not a completely foolproof argument because instanton action is not an observable. S matrix is observable. So, but if we assume the equality of the instanton actions, quantum corrected instanton actions, then one can argue that C is 0. Okay, this is not something that we have computed from string field theory. Okay, but although even it could be computed. So now let me state the numerical values of these constants that comes from fitting the matrix model result. Okay, so this is due to BRY, okay, private communications. This is not a published result. So what they found by numerical comparison between the 1 to n tachyon scattering and the formula that I showed in the previous slide are these values. And the error that we get here is of the order of ±0.01. Okay, because what we actually compute is of course not directly AF, AG, etc., okay, but some linear combinations of these, and from that you extract all of these constants. And now we see that indeed the 2 constants that we have been able to calculate, they do agree with these. So AG is -0.5, it's -half according to the string field theory analysis. This combination is -log4 according to string field theory analysis, which is within numerical errors, which agrees with the calculation that BRY had by comparing with the matrix model. Okay, so now I'll try to describe briefly how we go about doing this computation. And this will turn us to string field theory. So I'll have to give some brief overview of what string field theory is, and then I'll describe the origin of the problem and how we solve it. So string field theory we can regard as a regular quantum field theory with infinite number of fields. The perturbative amplitudes in this theory are just sum of Feynman diagrams. Contribution from a given Feynman diagram gives us back the worldsheet result, but the integral, okay, this is formal, okay, I'll say why it's formal, but the integral runs only over a part of the full region of integration. And when you sum over all the diagrams that we get from string field theory, we get the full integration region. The other point I'd like to mention is the string field theory is not unique, but comes in a whole family. But this whole family are all related to each other by field definition. Now this is problematic in some sense because in the intermediate state you don't have things which are unique. But it also is a boon because we can check at the end that the result is indeed independent of what string field theory you use, just to check your results. So first let me describe how do we get integral over worldsheet variables from a Feynman diagram. And this in fact comes from the usual Schwinger parameter representation. So if you take an internal propagator in a quantum field theory, okay, write this as k square plus m square inverse. This is the Schwinger parameter representation of this propagator. I'll use a slightly different representation in terms of this variable q. And it's the integration over these q's that give the integration over the worldsheet variables, but after a change of variable. Okay, you have to use string field theory to figure out how q is related to the worldsheet variables that we had seen earlier. And the divergences that you saw in the worldsheet result all come from the q goes to 0 region. And indeed, we can see that this integral is divergent when k square plus m square is non-positive. And in fact, one can show that all divergences that we encountered in string theory are of this kind. And now we can also understand the problem for d instantons. For d instantons, k is strictly 0. And as a result, we cannot analytically continue in momenta to make k square plus m square positive, do the calculation there, and then analytically continue back to k square plus m square less than 0. Okay, and this is essentially the problem with d instantons. So here I have written down the same expression, but now specific for d instantons. So I have set k equal to 0. Now, if you look at this equation, we see that this is an identity for m square positive. So you can use either the left hand side or the right hand side. There is no difference. But if m square is negative, then the left hand side is finite, but the right hand side is divergent. And string field theory tells us that after all, left hand side is what you started with, okay, and this is only a Schwinger parameter representation. So string field theory tells us that you just use the left hand side. So in practical terms, what this means that you have to change variables from the moduli of Riemann surfaces to the variables q1, q2 that are associated with the propagators, the Schwinger parameters. And after you have made this change of variable, then we replace any integral, divergent integral of this kind by 1 over beta for non-zero beta. Again, for beta positive, it's an identity, but for beta negative, this integral is divergent, but this is perfectly finite. And this replacement rule can be used to deal with power law divergences of the kind that we saw in earlier formula. This, as we'll discuss, this doesn't deal with the logarithmic divergences, but at least this can deal with power law divergences. There is, however, one subtle point that we must keep in mind, and that is that making the correct change of variables is important for getting the correct result. So let me explain why this is so. Okay, so I have shown you the replacement rule. So in particular, if you set beta equal to -1 in the earlier rule, you get a replacement rule which is given here. Now suppose you have misidentified q. Okay, imagine that we change variables to another variable q prime, which is related to q by this relation. Then we can re-express this integral in terms of q prime. Okay, here the integration measure remains the same. You can easily check. So the original integral can be re-expressed as a new integral like this. And now if you want to apply the replacement rule, we express this as from 0 to 1, an integral over q prime from 0 to 1. And then the rest of the integral, of course, is finite, which you can do explicitly. So if we now use the replacement rule on the first term, imagine that we didn't know whether to use q or q prime. And we erroneously thought that q prime is the variable on which you should apply this rule. Then the result will be given by -1. This will be replaced with this by -1. And this integral, of course, is a standard integral that you can do, which is given here. And we end up with an answer which is -1 plus c, which is clearly a different answer. So this shows that using q or q prime gives different result when you apply this replacement rule. And you have to use string field theory to identify the correct q. And later on, if I have time, I'll try to give an example of how to identify q's in a string field theory. Okay, so now let me start with a more problematic case. So here is the same identity again. Now we consider the case when m is 0. Here you see that both sides are divergent. And indeed here, these are associated with the 0 modes on the d instanton. Okay, because m equal to 0 means that the open string mass is 0. And as you can see, this will produce logarithmic divergence in the worldsheet description. And the strategy that we'll be following will be to understand the physical origin of the 0 modes And then we'll try to find suitable remedy by drawing insights from quantum field theories. So first set of zero modes come from collective coordinates. So d instantons of zero modes associated with translation of the instanton position along transverse directions. So in particular, if we consider the C equal to 1, the two-dimensional string theory that I have been describing, then the transverse, the only collective mode is a time transition because instanton is localized in time. So associated with these collective modes, there will be some zero mode on the d instanton, and these are represented by massless open string states on the d instantons. So before we discuss how to deal with them in string theory or string field theory, let me recall how we treat these in quantum field theories. So in quantum field theory, we carry out path integral over all the modes of the instanton other than chi in the background of chi. Okay, so that's the first thing we do. This means that while evaluating Feynman diagrams, we remove the chi contribution from the internal propagators, but keep the d instanton position chi arbitrary. Okay, so evaluate the result as a function of chi. And after summing over Feynman diagrams, we get a given amplitude as a function, which I'll denote by f of chi, and then we compute the integral over chi, the integral d phi f of chi. So our strategy will be that we will follow the same procedure for the d instantons. So in practical terms, this means that we drop terms of the form integral 0 to 1 dq inverse coming from the open string 0 mode phi that describes the collective coordinates. And this means that we remove phi propagators from the internal lines. Okay, so in string field theory language, this corresponds to removing phi propagator from internal lines. But in the worldsheet language, this just means that whenever we have divergences of this kind coming from the collective coordinates, we remove them, we subtract them. But at the same time, we must allow the external states to be both closed strings and open string 0 mode phi. And this leads to some function f of phi for a given closed string amplitude. And the final step will be to carry out integration over phi. Okay. And I'll describe the procedure that we use to carry out this integral. Now, in general, the mode phi, the 0 mode phi that comes from the open string field theory, is not directly the collective coordinate chi, but it is related to the collective coordinate chi via field definition. And after we carry out this field definition, we expect a simple chi dependence of this function f, because it should be of the form e to the I p dot chi. And the reason is that the collective coordinate, after all, is the position of the d instanton along the transverse directions. So if we have an amplitude where a total momentum p enters the amplitude, and if chi is the coordinate of the d instanton, then from general considerations, we know that the chi dependence should come in the form e to the I p dot chi. Okay. And now if you carry out the chi integration, it should give a delta p chi. Okay. This is the way the momentum conserving delta function is generated in d instanton amplitudes. The important point, however, is that the field definition that relates phi to chi, okay, and this is something you have to explicitly find by comparing how phi couples to the amplitudes to how chi should couple to the amplitudes via this coupling. So the field definition that relates phi to chi may give rise to Jacobian in the integration measure, and this needs to be taken into account in the analysis. And here I note that the integration measure over phi is fixed by the Battalion-Minkowski formalism that underlies string field theory, and we cannot tamper with it. So we cannot simply declare that the integration measure that we'll choose is simple integration measure over chi. We have to start with the integration measure over phi and find the appropriate Jacobian to construct the integration measure. Okay, so this Jacobian can be regarded as an extra contribution to the effective action, which can contribute to the amplitudes. But now we can come to the other kinds of problems that we face. And that comes from the fact that the open strings have other zero modes from the ghost sector. This is not what we normally encounter for usual instantons. So for this, let's consider the L0 equal to 0 sector of the expansion of a general open string state, which is given here. And the coefficients of expansion, so the C is the usual C ghost. Okay, so as you can see, all the oscillators, the total L0 quantum numbers add up to 0. I have labeled these coefficients as psi1 and psi2 and xi1 and xi2 because in the Batalyon-Minkowski language, these are called fields and these are called antifields in string field theory. But all of these are open string fields. And gauge fixing requires that we set two of these four fields to 0. Now I'll consider a specific class of gauge fixing which are allowed. We can either set psi1 to 0 or xi1 to 0. And independently, we can set psi2 to 0 or xi2 to 0. Now I said that the Feynman rules of string field theory eventually leads to the worldsheet description after using Schwinger parameterization. But this description in fact emerges in the Siegel gauge. And the Siegel gauge in this language corresponds to setting psi1 equal to 0 and xi2 equal to 0. This means that we choose the open string field, this state, to be consisting of only psi2 acting on vacuum and xi1 acting on C1, C minus or on vacuum. This state has a property that is annihilated by B0, and that's what is normally called the Siegel gauge condition. But the problem that we face is that in this gauge, the quadratic term of the string field theory, which I have written here, becomes independent of the remaining fields xi1 and psi2. So in a sense, the whole purpose of gauge fixing is lost because we don't. The idea of gauge fixing is to get non-zero kinetic term for all the fields, okay, but here we don't get non-zero kinetic term for xi1 and psi2. And as a result, these represent additional zero modes of the open string, and these give rise to additional logarithmic divergences in the worldsheet integrals, which are not removed by removing the collective modes from the propagators. And in fact, this is not just a fantasy. One can explicitly examine various string amplitudes, including the BRY amplitudes that I showed you, and see that some of the logarithmic divergences that you see in the amplitude, they are not coming from the collective modes, they are in fact coming from these ghosts. So the remedy that we follow is to choose a different gauge where you set xi1 equal to 0 and xi2 equal to 0. This means that we set both the antifields to 0. It's only in this sector, in the L0 equal to 0 sector. So we express the string field in this form. So this is not in the Siegel gauge. And as a result, the description that you get in the zero mode sector is not what you normally get in the worldsheet theory. Okay, I'll describe what you have to do in the worldsheet theory. Now, if you substitute this in the action, we find that psi1 appears a non-zero kinetic term. So this has a non-zero kinetic term and therefore a finite propagator. Psi2 still doesn't have a kinetic term. It still represents a zero mode. However, one can show that the psi2 decouples from the action completely by host number conservation. So not only doesn't it appear in the kinetic term, it doesn't appear anywhere else in the action. So as far as perturbation theory is concerned, we don't have to worry because there is no psi2 pole because it never appears in the action. And physically, the integration over psi2 in the path integral, the integration over psi2 corresponds to division by the volume of the rigid U1 gauge group that this theory is supposed to have. So integration over psi2 basically factorizes because the rigid U1 gauge group of course factorizes from the path integral, and this can be dropped. But again, I should emphasize that this dropping of the integration over psi2 can be done only after a possible field redefinition. So you have to carefully examine the couplings of psi2 in the ghost sector, including the fields that you have set to 0 in this gauge, compare with what you get from the ghost that comes from the rigid U1 gauge group. And then after you carry out the appropriate field redefinition, you can drop the integration. Positive. So this then leads to the following algorithm on the worldsheet. Namely that we remove all logarithmical divergent integrals of the form integral dq by q, including those that come from the Siegel gauge, those zero mode pairs psi1 psi2. So this makes our life simple because this says that once you have changed variables from using string field theory, from the worldsheet variables to these q's, all logarithmical divergent integrals can be dropped. But then we have to explicitly add the contribution from the psi1 propagators. We also have to take into account the Jacobians that arise from the change of variables from the string fields to collective modes and the ghosts associated with the rigid U1 symmetry. Because these Jacobians typically can be regarded as additional contribution to the effective action that doesn't come from the world in the worldsheet description, and those contributions have to be taken into account just as you take into account contribution from a term in the action in normal quantum field theories. So after you do all that, we are led to the results in the two-dimensional string theory that we described earlier. So in the few minutes that remain, what I'll do is to describe a simple calculation, okay, the simplest one in fact, and that's the contribution to AF. The AF, you remember, was a two-point function. It came from the two-point function on the disk, in fact the constant part of the two-point function on the disk. Now in string field theory, this contribution to AF comes from three Feynman diagrams. The convention that I'm using here is that the thick lines describe closed strings, thin lines describe open strings. So this is an internal open string propagator. Okay, so two open closed vortices connected by an internal open string. This gives you a contact interaction, okay, which also you can read out from string field theory. Okay. And this here you see the explicit psi1 exchange contribution that you have to take into account. Now I should say that this contribution that I am going to describe here is computed in a two-parameter family of string field theories. And this two-parameter family is labeled by two parameters lambda and gamma. And what we find at the end is that the contribution from diagram A is given by this, the contribution from diagram B is given by this combination over here, and the contribution from diagram BC is given by minus gamma square. And when you add up all these contributions, we get minus half, which is of course independent of these parameters as they should be, because AF, as you have seen, enters explicitly the S matrix. Okay, so I'll now describe the computation of AF, but I'll even simplify life further by work with gamma equal to 0. Okay, I'll describe how to compute an AF for the gamma equal to 0 family of string field theories.
Ashok, 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So if we set gamma equal to 0, then we have to define the CO vortex. Okay, so the family of string field theories means we have to define the vortex, interaction vortex. So in this family, we define the closed open interaction vortex by a two-point function on the upper half plane, with the closed string inserted at I and the open string inserted at the origin, which are the boundary. But you have to specify which coordinate system we use to insert the off-shell open string state. And we insert the off-shell open string state in the coordinate system W, which is lambda times A. Okay? And this is where the parameter lambda enters. Now the rule of string field theory tells us that the diagram A describes a Riemann surface that is obtained by showing two copies of the upper half plane. Why two copies? Because you have two vortices. Okay, so each vortex gives the upper half plane with a closed string puncture placed at I, an open string puncture placed at 0. And the way we glue it, the way we show the two upper half planes is that we take the local coordinate W of the first vortex and the local coordinate W of the second vortex, which are denoted by W prime or lambda Z prime, and multiply them and equate them to minus Q, with Q ranging from 0 to 1. From this, we can read out that the closed string vortex operators in the Z plane are placed at Z equal to I and at Z prime equal to I, which translates to Z equal to IQ by lambda square. And we now identify Y as Q by lambda square because Y was the location of the second closed string puncture on the upper half plane. So you see that the diagram A now covers the region 0 less than or equal to Q less than or equal to 1. That's always the case. But in terms of Y, it translates to the range from 0 to 1 over lambda square. Whatever is left is covered by diagram B. So diagram B covers the range from 1 over lambda square to 1. So now we are ready to calculate AF. So we take, this was the divergent contribution to AF. We express this as a sum of two integrals, okay, still divergent, from 0 to 1 over lambda square. This upper limit comes because diagram A, as you can see, covers up to 1 over lambda square. And then the rest. Here you change variable from Y to Q, okay, which is given here. This is a finite integral which you can do. And that's the result. Okay. So here this one we replace by minus 1. That gives minus lambda square by 2, and this one is the usual integral, finite integral. It gives you minus 1 half. And in this case, one can show that the psi1 exchange contribution vanishes because the closed open vortex, this vortex or this vortex when psi 1 actually is 0. So this brings me to the end of the talk. So let me now summarize with some open questions. So it has been known for about 20 years that the same matrix model with a different vacuum is expected to be dual to a different string theory, namely type 0B string theory. So these are same perturbative S matrix but different instant and contribution. And then the question that arises naturally is that is it possible to verify this explicitly by string theory computation? The second point I want to emphasize is that the method that I have described here is applicable to any string theory, including type 2B string theory in D equal to 10. Here, a lot of the results are again known because of the S duality. Okay, so it started with the work of Green and Woodpurley, and then there are many further developments where from S duality, we know what the instant and contribution should be, okay, in many cases. And the question is, can we extract the instant contribution to the effective action by doing explicit string theory calculation and compare the results with what we know from S duality. The third point is about the overall normalization constant n. I have not said anything about how to fix this, and we have not fixed it. What it represents is the ratio of the path integral measure in the d instanton sector and the vacuum sector. And the reason that we have not been able to fix it is because we use separate string field theories in the d instanton sector and in the vacuum sector. But in principle, we can start with an unstable d-brane system and regard both the d instanton and the vacuum as different classical solutions in the same theory. So in a sense, we can embed both of these in the same string field theory, and we should be able to fix a relative normalization. This has not been done, but it will be interesting to see if one can do this. And finally, let me end with a more ambitious question. Namely, is it possible to combine the d instanton contribution and perturbative contribution to string amplitudes, because we now have well-defined algorithm to compute both systematically. Perhaps we can combine this with the idea of resurgence, and you can ask whether it gives a full non-perturbative definition of string amplitudes. So with this I'll end. Thank you.
So let's thank Ashok for such a nice talk. So if you have questions, please raise your hand so that I can detect you in the participant list and allow you to ask your question. Emil, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering whether techniques like this would be interesting to apply to collective coordinate quantization of d-branes. For instance, things like monopole scattering of d-brane monopoles.
Yeah, in principle it can be. I mean, you can, but I don't know whether it will be easier than doing it directly in quantum field theories. Right? But certainly, if you embed the quantum field theory in a string field theory, okay, we can regard the monopoles as d-branes, we can certainly use these techniques to do this calculation. Because from the point of view of string field theory, all divergences can be taken care of once you understand their origin. Okay? And string field theory gives you a well-defined measure because the Bartolini-Minkowski formalism fixes the measure. So there is no ambiguity in what the measure is. Whether it will be easier than doing it directly in quantum field theory, of course, is something that I don't know.
So I see Spenta has a question. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, Ashok. I have the following question, actually. So as you know, the two-dimensional string theory also has a black hole solution. That's a background in your string field theory. Yes. Now, we also know that even after a lot of effort, we are not able to understand, at least I do not know, how the matrix model can be sort of extended to describe this background in the bulk two-dimensional theory. Is there any hint or any sort of idea you may get from your string field theory, which describes everything about what the deformation of the matrix model can be? That's the question.
Yeah, see, the point is it doesn't describe everything, because the way at least I have presented it is that we take a particular D instanton and we construct the string field theory by describing fluctuations of that D instanton, right? And of course all the closed strings. But this can be avoided because we can put the D instanton. You can regard the D instanton as a solution in some on some higher dimensional branes, okay, or say D0 brane, and we can try to describe both the D instanton and the perturbative vacuum in the same sector. But whether it will describe the black hole is, I'm not sure, because we are certainly fixing the asymptotic boundary condition. Normally one expects that the black hole will come from non-singlet sector. So I'm not sure whether the string field theory will include black hole sector by itself.
Okay, thank you.
And the way at least I view it is that this is a tool for understanding perturbation theory. Right? I mean, we are not trying to attempt non-perturbative physics, because that requires perhaps a different formulation of string field theory, because the way the string field theory is constructed here is really perturbative. So as far as any question in perturbation theory is concerned, this is this string field theory is able to handle, but non-perturbative questions are harder.
Thank you.
So there's some questions, some comments that I think are relevant in the group chat. And does anybody want to explain that for the larger audience?
Yeah, I was just saying that the just to echo what Ashok was saying, that usually black hole degrees of freedom come from non-singlet sectors and matrix models, and when you estimate the energy of non-singlet contributions to the matrix model, they decouple in the scaling limit. They get pushed off to infinite energy. So from the matrix model side, you don't expect there to be black holes in the spectrum. And on the worldsheet side, there's an analysis of Givon, Kutuzov, Rabinovich, and Sever that string theory and linear dilaton backgrounds has a correspondence transition as a function of the slope of the linear dilaton. And in this low dimension, the slope of the linear dilaton is too high, and you're on the string side of the string black hole correspondence transition. So from the worldsheet side, you also expect that black holes don't exist as normalizable states in the theory.
Can I add a question here?
Yes, please go ahead, Panos.
So there are models like Calogero models or spin Calogero models where other representations are play important roles. So in such models, you might be able to find states that are related to the black hole, right? Not in the original singlet sector, but in extensions of the original matrix model. So can you comment on that? I've actually tried to work on a model of that type.
Emil, you want to comment?
That's a question for me.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So it's a statement that the metric deformation that leads to the black hole solution is what's called a non-normalizable state. So it's not part of the spectrum of the original theory you were starting with. It's just a different theory.
Okay, thanks. I understand.
So let's hear from Shi Yin, who's been probably. Okay. So Shi Yin, please.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on this. I agree with Emil's comment on the black hole not being a state in sequence one string theory, at least within the usual closing sector. I just want to mention that there was a conjecture made by Juan Matosino 15 years ago, in which he suggested that in fact you can get a black hole by taking a decoupling limit of large set of FZP branes that retreat off to infinity. Now, these FZP branes, they change the boundary asymptotic boundary condition. So it's kind of clear from that picture where to look for this black hole, and it requires extending the dual matrix model.
All right, okay, Saf said he has a question, please go ahead. Saf?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah,
Saf,
go
we
ahead.
can hear you. Please ask the question.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was hearing no response. Ashok, that was a very nice talk. My question is, could you comment a little bit more on how you would apply your string field theory approach to moduli stabilization? And specifically, can you say something about whether this would work for off-shell configurations in string theory?
Okay, the way I have described it here, it's perturbative. So as long as the corrections are small, you can certainly try to describe it. Right? For example, the Ramon-Ramon background. If you want to describe Ramon-Ramon background, you cannot describe large Ramon-Ramon background, but if its effect is small, you can describe in the string field theory. Similarly, in moduli stabilization, right? I mean, for example, if you try to describe KKLT type moduli stabilization, there is really no systematic procedure, right? Because you are stabilizing instant corrections against classical potential. But to the extent that you accept it, you can, in principle, do order by order calculation using string field theory. So if you have a KKLT background, and suppose you want to compute amplitudes in that background, then you have KKLT has d instantons, right? So you need to compute d instanton scattering in the presence of d instantons. You can use this technique to do that computation, but it will not justify why KKLT is a valid procedure, right? Because you don't have a systematic perturbation expansion. So, I see. I think Savi is not being able to hear the response.
Well, the talks are being recorded, so I think that Saf might go back and hear your answer. So any other questions for Ashok or comments?
Yeah, could I ask something?
Please, Igor, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this was already asked in some form by Emil, but for example, just the old problem of the zero brane recoil. I realize we might not have the full string field theory, but I think there are similar issues there. And do you think similar ideas can be applied to obtain relativistic recoil of the zero branes?
Yeah, I think that should certainly be possible, because it's a perturbative question, right? It does that the amplitudes diverge, but it's a perturbative question, and once you understand the physical origin of this, you should be able to apply exactly the same trick to study D0 brane recoil.
Because it's a classic problem that hasn't been fully elucidated, I think. Just a very basic question about D branes.
Yeah. Yeah, low dimensional D branes. All low dimensional D branes have problems of this kind, right? Is that? But these certainly can be addressed by this technique.
Yeah, or wrapped higher dimensional branes, the ones that can recoil, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So by D0 brane, I mean anything that has no extension in a non-compact direction.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any further questions? We have a few more minutes. All right. If not, let's thank Ashok altogether.